Hey, welcome to my channel. My name is Jessie, and today I'm wrapping up the books I read in April and giving a little life update. I think I'm actually going to start with a life update just because it's a little bit quicker, and also I just want to get out of the way, and I'm excited about a lot of stuff that's happened in April. Before I get started though, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to my channel to make finding my content just a little bit easier. First of all, April is kind of the end of the semester. The semester doesn't officially end until the first week of May, but all of my assignments really were due the last week of April, so April is just an incredibly busy month with finishing up final projects on top of keeping up with new assignments that were coming in as they were coming. So I spent a lot of time doing schoolwork and also constantly feeling stressed and behind, but I got it all done, which is exciting. And now I am just waiting about 3 more weeks for the summer semester to start. I also started job hunting in April. For my degree, I had the option between 1 semester of student teaching or a 1-year paid internship. And ideally, I would really like to do the 1-year paid internship just because it will help better with daycare cost, car maintenance, and all that other stuff. So I had a few job interviews, and I'm really excited to say that I got to sign a letter of intent with one of the schools that I interviewed at last week. And so I'm incredibly excited, and I'm hoping that everything will go smoothly. I think from here on out, I'm just waiting for the background check, which I think should already be processed, but I'm not 100% sure how all of that works. And school board approval. Ideally, as long as things go smoothly, I will hopefully be signing my first teaching contract sometime in May. So that's incredibly exciting, and I'm excited to see where that goes. April 27th was also mine and Chris's 10-year dating anniversary. We started dating at the end of my freshman year and the end of his sophomore year. And we finally got around to getting married on our anniversary this year. I don't really know why it took us so long. I know for several years we made plans to do it and just never got around to it. And then around year 8, I knew that I wanted to wait till year 10 because I knew I liked the way the years lined up. And also in several years, whenever we can't remember what year we got married, it should be easier because, oh, it's on our 10-year anniversary. That's such a big milestone. That's a decade together. And so I'm really excited. It was a really small affair. We just went to a local precinct and a little bit of our family was there. It was a little bigger than I had originally wanted, but it was still really small overall, and I liked it. That's it for the life update, and I guess now let's talk about the books I read in April. April was another great month quality-wise. Most of the books I read were 4 and 5 stars, with 2, 3, and 3.5 star books. My quantity of reading also improved a little bit, and I'm glad I managed to read a few more books in April than I had in February and March. I'm hoping that trend will continue to go up a little bit. I'm not wanting to read anything, like 20 books a month. I would like to get closer to 10 to 12 books a month, just so I have room for all the books that I really want to get to, as well as, extra ones that I can squeeze in when I see something on a whim. This month I'm going to be talking about the books in alphabetical order just because I want to. I don't really want to talk about them in orders from favorites to least favorites or least favorites to favorites, and I don't want to talk about them in the order that I read them either. We're just going to do alphabetical order, and we're going to skip the words the and a. If they're the first words, we'll go to the next word. So because of that, the first book I had is Love Like Magic by Lizelle Samberry. This was a 5-star read. This book and 2 other books in this video will also be in a 5-star prediction vlog that I think should be going up sometime near the end of this month or beginning of next month, but please don't hold me to it. We've seen how that's gone for me lately. This book follows Voya, and she's a witch, and she is tasked with killing her first love or her family loses their magic. And when her family loses their magic, there are much more dire consequences that will happen because of that. This book was incredibly high stakes from the beginning. There were so many things I loved about this book, and I had a great time with it, but I think I'm going to start with my one really minor complaint, and that is at the very beginning of the book, like maybe the first quarter or so. Voya's indecisiveness was very caricaturized. It just felt overly done and overly dramatic. But as the book went on, her indecisiveness started to feel more real, and it started to feel less traumatized. I also really enjoyed following Voya as a character. She was struggling so much to make the right decision because she wanted to make the decision that would be best for everybody, but she didn't know what the decision was, and she didn't know how to come across that decision, and she had a lot of trouble trusting her own instinct. At the same time, Voya is also trying to figure out, who is her first love, and how should she interpret that? Should she interpret that very literally or more figuratively? And who is her first love, because she's never been in love? So it was interesting trying to watch Voya make that decision and see how she would get there. There were so many things I also loved about this book. So I really love fantasy, and I enjoy fantasy, and I enjoyed the way the fantasy was handled in this story where, Voya and her family are witches, and there's this whole community of witches in their world, and they kind of, are living under the radar as far as everything else goes. The rest of the world isn't really aware that witches exist. Sci-fi is kind of a genre and element that I kind of struggle with, and I don't always like, but I also like the way it was handled in this book. In this particular book, it was a lot of, DNA and genetics science fiction, and this world they live in relies heavily on DNA and genetics for a bunch of stuff. And so the way that was included, plus, you know, the sci-fi or the futuristic Canadian setting was just interesting, and I had a great time with it. Another thing that I absolutely loved about this book was just the casual queerness throughout it. I love that, you know, so many queer characters got to exist and just exist without having to explain their existence. There are moments, there's this one incident that Alex brings up, and Alex is one of Voya's cousins. So many important people in Voya's lives are queer or LGBTQIA+ in some way, and so I really enjoyed that. And then finally, I love the family dynamic and just seeing how Voya and her family got along and the way they were structured. It felt so real. The argumentativeness, the cattiness, the way they loved each other just felt really real. And I really enjoyed the matriarch as well. Voya's grandmother, the matriarch. Based off like the book, I think she's probably somewhere between, you know, late millennial or early Gen Z. And so it was actually kind of funny and interesting to catch the references to current social media and stuff. But overall, this is an amazing book, and I'm really glad I read it, and I had a great time with it. Next, I read Dating Dr. Dill by Nisha Sharma, and I rated it 4 stars. This book follows Karina and Prim. Karina just turned 30, and she's finally decided that she's ready to date and find love. She had taken a break from dating because she was trying to establish herself in a career that she loved, and she also has a lot going on in her family life, but her family doesn't really respect her because she isn't even at least engaged or even dating anybody. And you know, to a lot of her family, it's important that she be at the very least engaged before her sister, who is about to get married, gets married. Karina also now has a deadline on herself to get engaged by a certain time. That way her father doesn't sell her mother's house out from underneath her. Her father's not necessarily doing it to be malicious or evil, but he's ready to move on to a different part of his life, and he wants to encourage both of his daughters to move on with theirs. Prim, on the other hand, has this television personality, Dr. Dill, where he has a television segment on a local news channel where he discusses health issues that affect the local Asian population in their city. And he doesn't believe in love, and he kind of has a big reason for it, and it has to do with a past relationship that he's had. And he and Karina meet one night at a bar, they hit it off, and things are going great, and they both need to be engaged by a certain point. And at some point you think it's going to introduce this fake dating element, but they never really even officially start fake dating. And I think that's one of my complaints about the book. It never feels like Karina and Prim are ever going to get together, and when they do finally get together, it feels a little bit lackluster. All the other moments they shared together I enjoyed them both as individual characters, and I just couldn't put the book down, so it just felt wrong to rate it as anything below 4 stars because of how much fun I had while I was reading it. I also read A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik, and it was a 3.5 star read. This book follows Elle, who attends the Scholomance, which is this magical school where, you know, the school is essentially trying to kill you and there's no adults, so pretty much a bunch of kids from 14 to 18 have to fend for themselves over the years and try to make it out at graduation at the end of the time. Elle is a junior, and most of this book, I think, takes place the last 2 or so weeks of the semester or the school year. I started off the book really enjoying it and having a great time with it, but as the book went on, I just kind of struggled with it. Elle is very powerful and also knows that she has a lot of potential to be incredibly powerful and evil. She's kind of isolated herself, and now she's trying to prove herself and try to find an enclave to get into so she has a better chance of surviving graduation. But at the same time, she kind of keeps self-sabotaging, and then there's this guy named Orion who keeps accidentally saving her, and there's just a lot that happens throughout all that. And at first it was exciting and fun, but as I read the book, I just kind of struggled to stay into it, and I struggled to want to read it at times. One thing is that the chapters were too long in my opinion, and I think that's just a me issue, but the book is kind of slow paced and the chapters are really long, so at times it felt like it was dragging and hard to read. The other complaint I have, and this one's also a little bit minor, and this one might be a little bit of a nitpick on my part, but at times it felt like the book was shifting back and forth between past tense and present tense, but not in a way that made sense. It felt like in the middle of a paragraph it would change from past tense to present tense, or then sometimes Elle would be talking about the past, but she would be describing her past in almost a present tense writing and describing the present in almost past tense writing, and it just mixed up, and I had to keep going back and rereading paragraphs because it just wasn't clicking and I was getting confused. I do think I'm going to read the second book, but I don't think I'm going to buy it. The last line of this book has me curious about the second book, and so I think I'm going to try listen to the audiobook on Libby, but I don't think I'm going to buy it, and there's a good chance this will be on hold at some point unless I just happen to love the second book, so we'll just see how it goes from there. This was an okay book, but definitely wasn't a favorite, and definitely not one that at this point in time I could see myself rereading. Fix Her Up by Tessa Bailey was another 4-star read for me. Fix Her Up follows Georgie and Travis. Georgie is probably about 5 or so years younger than Travis. I'm assuming she was an oops baby because it was described as whenever she was born, her family's roles had already been determined as far as, like, you know, her brother and sister's roles in the family business. She didn't have one, and she's also so much younger than them. Georgie is actually a birthday party clown, and she's a little bummed that other adults and her family don't take her seriously. She wants to grow her business and have it be, you know, a bigger thing with more people working for it and have it be just bigger and better. Travis, on the other hand, he grew up most of his life wanting to prove that he's better than his father, I guess, and he ends up going to play pro baseball and he ends up being injured not too many years into it, and he can't play anymore. So he's really down and depressed about that. And so he needs to clean up his image though, because he's just gotten an offer to kind of get back in the world of baseball without playing baseball. And so he and Georgie end up in a fake dating relationship, and it's kind of a mess at first because Travis wants to stay away from Georgie because, you know, she's his best friend's little sister, but at the same time he also sees how no one takes her seriously. And also Georgie, as far he doesn't know this, he's known Georgie probably had a crush on him, but he hasn't known that Georgie's probably been in love with him her whole life. So it was fun and interesting in that part. I would say my one major complaint though is just Georgie's, like, you know, constant quirkiness and tininess. I understand that some people are small and some characters are small, and that's fine. It's just, it gets a little aggravating where it's constantly mentioned, and I feel like that was mentioned quite a bit. But overall, it was interesting, it was good, and I'm actually, I think, more so excited to read the second book. But this one was fun, and I had trouble putting it down, so that's kind of also why it ended up being 4 stars. There were some things I didn't love about it, but also I couldn't put it down, so it didn't feel right to give it a lower rating. Homicide and Halal by Mia P. Manansala was a 4-star read for me as well. I read Arsenic and Adobo sometime last fall, and I absolutely loved it. It was so interesting, and I found out that I'm really interested in the cozy mystery genre. And this is the next book in that series. And in this particular book, Leela is investigating another murder, but this murder was of a pageant judge and her cousin Bernadette, who she's always had kind of a struggling relationship with, is the suspect. Leela kind of has to, you know, look into Bernadette's what's happening while also dealing with her own struggles, because she's having a lot of past issues, especially with her mom come up from working in this pageant, as well as a lot of issues with with what happened at the end of the last book. She's struggling to deal with the trauma with everything that happened, and she's kind of struggling to find out how to cope because she doesn't really want to do therapy at first. She doesn't really want to do anything like that at first, just because she doesn't want anyone to look down on her, and she doesn't want anyone to think she's weak, I guess, for not being able to handle it. And so overall though, I liked the way it was handled overall. This was a great book. I liked that things weren't just magically better at the end of the last book. I liked that Leela had to process everything that happened. I loved seeing more of the relationships Leela made with different people in the town. But my one minor complaint is that I wish that Leela and Adina, her best friend, had more time together. And I don't remember how I felt about Adina at the end of the last book, but I think I liked her more this book. But I do wish that they'd have more time together, especially because somewhere near the middle or end of the last book, it was like kind of hinted at that Adina would play a bigger role in these investigations than what she does. I will say also that I feel like if the series goes on and on for a little bit longer, it's gonna definitely be more and more interesting that all these murders started happening whenever Leela came back to town. So I'm interested to see how that's handled as the series goes on. But I am also excited to read the next book that I think comes out sometime in October. The Nature of Witches by Rachel Griffin was another 5-star read, and I loved so much about this book. This book follows Clara, who is an Everwitch. And so in this world, witches are born on the start of any particular season, and that is the season where they have the strongest powers. Clara just happened though to have been born during the start of the fall season, but she has the strongest powers in every season. Her powers different parts of her powers get stronger during different seasons, and she can kind of pull from other people's powers and help them and use theirs. In this particular world, witches have always kind of controlled the climate and helped keep it safe and working correctly, but things are just getting rougher and rougher with the way regular people are not really taking care of the world. So as an Everwitch, Clara will have the most potential to do the most good for the world and save the climate the most. But also being an Everwitch has made a lot of parts of her life really hard, and she's had a lot of loss because of it. And so she doesn't really want to be an Everwitch, and she really ideally in the perfect world would rather get rid of her powers. At the same time, she also in this book meets this guy named Song, and they fall in love, and that also adds more difficulties, but she also learns more about her powers. And just overall, I love the way this book was handled. It did not help my climate anxiety whatsoever. I was definitely made me a little more anxious, I guess. But overall, the rest of the story was great, and I had a great time with it. I also really like the way it ended. At the end of the book, nothing's perfect. Things are still difficult, but there is a plan in place to make things better. But I had a great time with this book. Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson was also 4 stars for me. This book follows Elizabeth, who grew up in these great libraries where she had to learn about and protect these books called grimoires. And these books are basically living. And she also has to kind of keep the books away from sorcerers, because sorcerers are evil as far as she knows, and they will wreak havoc on the world if they get a hold of too many grimoires. and if their viewing of grimoires isn't controlled. But at some point, Elizabeth is framed for this crime, and she ends up working with this guy named Nathaniel, who just so happens to be a sorcerer, to figure out who framed her, why they framed her, how to prove that this person framed her, and how to fix things from there. Nathaniel also makes her realize that all of her thoughts about sorcerers and sorcery were wrong, and there's also a little bit of a romance with Nathaniel. So unfortunately, this book didn't hold my attention the way I wanted it to, and that's kind of why it ended up being 4 stars. I really loved An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson, and so I was really just expecting this book to hook me and hold my attention and for me to love it, and it just didn't happen. I think a little bit of that might have been that I expected a little bit more from the romance. I think I expected it to play a slightly bigger role than it did, and so that's probably my own fault, but I did like this book and I did have a good time with it. One thing I kind of appreciate about this book is that I think for the most part, because the libraries are so isolated from the rest of society, everything Elizabeth learned about sorcerers was outdated, so I don't think they were purposefully being bad. I don't think her teachers were purposefully being mean or bad towards sorcerers. I think they all just had outdated information and not enough interaction with the real world. But I enjoyed seeing, Elizabeth learn more about sorcerers and demons and stuff, and learn that her own thoughts may have been a little wrong. I enjoyed her also changing her mind about what she wanted from her future, and kind of like realizing that everything she wanted in the past may not be what she still wants. So overall, it was a good book. I just didn't love it as much as I wanted to. Lastly, I have What Big Teeth by Rose Sosbo, and this was a 3-star read for me. This book follows Eleanor, who was sent to a boarding school as a child, and she's just come home because there's this big incident. And when she comes home, things aren't quite the same. Her and her family don't know each other hardly at all, really. The main thing she knows about her family is that a couple of family members can turn into wolves, and some other family members have a little bit of magic of their own. And then Eleanor doesn't really know how she fits into all of this. And then her grandmother dies and leaves her in charge of keeping the family safe. And she's given one rule from the grandmother that she breaks really soon into the book. And she's just trying to figure out how to keep her family safe and move on from there. Overall, this book was okay, but I didn't love it, and I think this is one that I'm going to unhaul. This is one that I don't see myself ever rereading, and there's just a lot about this book that just didn't work for me. The one thing that worked for me and that I did enjoy, though, was the atmosphere of the book. It had a very moody, gothic atmosphere that I really enjoyed, and I liked the way that was set up. But that's about it. The family dynamics were incredibly strained and hard to understand and hard to follow. And one day, in one particular day, Eleanor gets slapped by 2 separate family members. There's also this character named Arthur that so many people in the family have been infatuated with that even once it was explained, I still didn't get it or care for it. So overall, I just don't think this is a good pick for me, but I did read this as my April Buzzword Challenge book, and that vlog will probably be going up at the end of this month just because I'm a little behind on videos anyways. That is it for my little life update and my April reading wrap up. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and I will talk to you later. Bye.